Siyajabula ingane, siyajabula. Bayasibiza amasiko tukeniwo. Namhlanje siyajabula.
This is a story of maps and of ghosts. Ghosts of the living, of the dead, and of those yet to be born. South Africa has a long history of contestation. During colonial times and apartheid, indigenous black and other people were moved around the country at the will of the racist government. Acts like the Natives Land Act and others were precursors to the notorious Group Areas Act. The Group Areas Act was proposed, conceived and systematized by MAPS. This map, entitled the Model Apartheid City, provided guidelines on how to segregate cities and towns across the country. Note how the primary factor that determined location was race. White group areas were separated from all other group areas by means of barriers such as railway lines or industrial areas. The plan was effectively and violently implemented, and we are still haunted by this map today. Probably the most iconic site of apartheid's forced removals is in Cape Town. It was called District 6. The outline of the old District 6 is shown here in red. This was the area that was proclaimed a whites-only area in 1966. CPUT's District 6 campus lies right in the middle of the site. What follows is a cartographic story of District 6. It is one of many stories and is told with the help of GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. The Department of Civil Engineering and Surveying used to be located on this campus, but we were moved to Bellville campus. In our department, geomatics students and staff research the history of District 6 through the lens of GIS. GIS technology can help to produce an analysis of the old District 6 and its relation to the present. I want to take a trip through time using maps of District 6. Here is a relatively recent map from 2011 showing our campus and the outline of District 6 shown in red. The current road network is shown in green. I can switch that off and show in yellow the old road network that used to exist in District 6, most of which was destroyed. Now let's travel back to 1862. This is a map drawn by surveyor William Snow, one of the very first maps to cover the area of what would become District 6. About half of the area was empty land. The label on the map calls the area Kanala Dorp. Kanala is a Malay word meaning to help one another. Some of the familiar road names can be seen, like Hanover, Clifton, William, and Caledon. In 1867, it was named the 6th District of Cape Town, or District 6. Now let's go to the late 1800s. This is a map from 1890, showing the development of District 6 at that time. By 1900, District 6 was overcrowded. Cape Town experienced massive immigration, and many people initially settled in District 6 when they got here from all over the world. There were Jews from Russia, Indians, Chinese, Turks, Egyptians, Australians, and Scots. Additionally, there were local black people, as well as freed slaves who would have originated from Madagascar, West Africa, the Indian subcontinent, or Southeast Asia. They are our ancestors. The oldest aerial image we have is from 1926, a time between the two world wars. At the time, the government leaders were Jan Smuts and General J.B.M. Hertzog. In 1927, the Immorality Act is passed. Its purpose, as it said, was to prohibit illicit carnal intercourse between Europeans and natives and other acts in relation thereto. Let me zoom into the southern part of District 6. This is Horsley Street, a very important street in the history of District 6. In the early 1900s, the growing black population in Cape Town concerned the white population, who felt that there was a need for a black location. Horsley Street contained many African dock workers from the Transkei who wanted cheap accommodation. This is what it used to look like. Horsley Street landlords willingly catered for this demand, packing large numbers of people into little houses. In February 1901, the plague broke out, and the Horsley Street blacks were quickly blamed to be the source of the infection. This paved the way for the first forced removals from District 6. They were made to move to Indabeni, Cape Town's first black township. Here is a picture of some of the District 6 evictees, confined in isolation at a military camp. They would then be moved to these tents in Indabeni. Also shown is a typically complacent official statement in a news report describing the situation. It was later found that the plague was caused by Argentinian fodder that was imported for horses during the Boer War. Behind campus, there is still a part of the original Horsley Street. A scar, a haunting. Here are the remains of Horsley Street today. It sits there, in a state of limbo, surrounded by bush growing on the rubble of the houses that were demolished over 40 years ago. In present-day Cape Town, there is a co-presence of multiple time zones, and we are still haunted by actions from over a century ago. Now let's go back to the GIS software. The next date to visit is 1945, just after World War II. South Africa was called the Union of South Africa, and in 1948, the Afrikaner-dominated National Party was in power, led by D.F. Malan. In the 1940s, the Cape Town municipality had started to make plans to demolish houses in District 6 under slum clearance. It was around this time that Sissy Gould served on the Cape Town City Council. A woman ahead of her time, she was called Cape Town's Joan of Arc. She was the first black woman in the country to serve in local government, and represented District 6 in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. This was remarkable, considering that this was during a time when she did not have the right to vote. In 1962, she received an LLB degree from UCT, becoming the first woman of color on the Cape Bar. Let's go forward to 1953. As you can see, District 6 was fully built, and in 1953, the residents of District 6 did not know what was about to hit them. Some of the most repressive apartheid laws were promulgated in the 1950s, such as the Group Areas Act, the Natives Resettlement Act, and the Reservation of Separate Immunities Act. By means of the Population Registration Act, new identities were imposed upon people. People were now officially white, native, or colored. Colored was the most ambiguous term, comprising 7 categories. This new classification scheme gave voice to some and ghostly silence to others. Resistance leaders emerged all over the country. An important treason trial happens in Johannesburg in 1956. Many of the leaders of the resistance are arrested and charged with treason under the Suppression of Communism Act. Amongst the 156 arrested were Nelson Mandela, Ahmed Kathrada, Alex Laguma from District 6, Joe Slovo and Ruth First, Chief Albert Lutuli, Oliver Tambo, Dr. Chota Motala, and I.C. Mir. The defendants were found not guilty, but the harassment would continue. Now let's go back to District 6, and this time let's go to the 1960s. By the early 1960s, although it was a crowded inner city area, it had a vibe that is still spoken about today. This footage of the people of District 6 in the 1960s going about their everyday lives belies the catastrophe that was being planned. This is what District 6 looked like back then. Everyday reality was about to become haunting memory. The next aerial image is from 1968. In 1966, the government declared District 6 a whites-only area under the Group Areas Act, with the removal starting in 1968. In 1968, the N2 highway is being built. In this image, you can see that most of District 6 is intact, apart from this section which shows where some of the first demolitions and forced removals happened. This was the block bounded by Caledon, De Villiers, Stone and Clifton streets. If I swipe the current imagery, you can see that it correlates to the location of the engineering building of CPUT. Our building sits at the epicenter of the destruction. The Extension of University Education Act bans black students from attending white universities. The Cape Technical College was formed for white students and the Peninsula Technical College for colored students. These would later go on to become Cape Technicon and Peninsula Technicon. Other highlights or lowlights from the 1960s. Robben Island is turned into a prison. In 1962, Abdullah Ibrahim, or Dollar Brand, the famous jazz musician from District 6, goes into exile in Europe because of government harassment. Now let's go to 1977. By the late 1970s, the destruction and demolition of District 6 was in full effect. You can see that many of the buildings in the western section are gone. Photographs from the period of demolition don't adequately capture the confusion, anger, greed, hatred, sadness and fear of the time. The ghosts of demolition are still here. What else happened in the 1970s? The 1970 Bantu Homeland Citizenship Act strips blacks of their South African citizenship, and in 1977 the Bantustans of Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda and Ciskei gained so-called independence or self-government. Black people were then removed to the homelands on a large scale. Their movement was curtailed and policed by means of the pass laws. Blacks were made to carry the despised pass books or dompas when traveling outside the homelands. Hundreds of thousands of people per year are arrested for pass law offences. In 1978, P.W. Botha replaces John Vorster as Prime Minister. 1978 was International Anti-Apartheid Year. A year before, Steve Biko was murdered in police detention. Let's go further to 1983. In 1983, the full force of the destruction can be observed. District 6 was demolished, and by this time more than 60,000 people were forcibly removed. It looks like a war zone. Notice that there were only a few buildings left standing. These were mainly churches and mosques. St. Mark's Church, the Moravian Chapel, and Ellesmere Street Mosque are all still standing on our campus. Cape Technikon, a whites-only institution, was built shortly after this, and the first buildings appeared in 1986. And now, here is the aerial image from 1996. You can see the campus we know today. Back then, it was still called Cape Technikon. What happened in the 90s? In the Mandela government, there were two deputy presidents, Thabo Mbeki and F.W. de Klerk. Many discriminatory apartheid laws are repealed in the 1990s. South Africa wins the Rugby World Cup in 1995 and the Africa Cup of Nations in 1996. Let's go to 2011. CPUT was formed in 2005 when the Cape Technikon and Peninsula Technikons merged. So what you see here is a 6-year-old CPUT. If I turn on a layer of the old District 6 sites, we can work out where they are in relation to where we are today. On our campus is the location of important sites like the Hanover Building, the Little Wonder Shop, the Taj Restaurant, Westminster Cafe, the Post Office, and the Fish Market. The Star Cinema was here. The Public Wash House was here, with its elaborate machinery. It was built over a mountain stream, which may still be flowing underground. The Moravian Chapel is still standing, and it used to look like this. This is the location of the 7 Steps, perhaps the most iconic site of District 6. It was situated at the corner of Hanover Lane and Hanover Street. It was the very heart of District 6, and right now it is situated near an entrance to the admin building. Here is the rather sad-looking location of the 7 Steps today. Just outside the admin building is St. Mark's Church, which is still standing today, surrounded by CPUT. We have been carrying out some collaborative research with St. Mark's Church, mapping baptismal records. Based on information contained in the baptismal records, we are able to put dots on the map, representing the homes of babies who were baptized at St. Mark's Church. Each yellow dot represents the location of a baby who was baptized in the 1950s. Every one of these babies were uprooted from their homes and were forced to move. This big green dot is Esther Cottle, who was one of the babies baptized in 1942. She lived at 70 de Villiers Street in this house, which was demolished. Here is a picture of Esther today. She is holding up her baptismal record in St. Mark's Church. After being forced to move to Mitchell's Plain, Esther contemplated leaving St. Mark's Church, thinking that it was a possibility she would no longer be able to attend. It wasn't long after the removals that her longing to return to her beloved church grew enough, and she and her children would make the long train ride between Mitchell's Plain and District 6. She did this for 32 years. District 6 is a contested space. More than 60,000 lives were directly affected, being forced to move away from home. The building of the Cape Technikon was a slap in the face of the children of District 6. However, CPUT caters to many poor and rural students who travel far from all over South Africa to Cape Town. They come to study at CPUT and stay at one of the residences in District 6. They are afforded the opportunity to live in and enjoy the Cape Town CBD, an opportunity that would not have been possible had there not been a campus here. This is only one story of the place that people came to know as District 6, and the university that came to be known as CPUT. CPUT can be seen as it is now, sitting at the foot of Table Mountain. Or, if we look close enough, we can sense the ghosts of this place. We must not ignore the ghosts of the past as we make maps of the present. In our cartographies, what gestures are we making to the ghosts of the future?